The hall already smelled of scorched alloy and resin scars from a dozen failed trials. Armor Day never ended clean. Every cadet knew someone would bleed, crack, or shatter under the test. That was the point. The instructor's voice cut through the room, low and commanding. Today, you will craft armor from what is here. No imports, no forges, no gifts from home. Show us how your kind defends itself when all else is stripped away. The hall shifted. Bodies leaned forward, claws flexed, wings unfolded. For most species, armor wasn't a uniform or a commodity, it was history. Defense was legacy. How your people protected themselves wasn't just a method, it was identity. The first cadet stepped forward, massive and bony, a Threxel from the volcanic rim systems. His claws dug into a stack of spare alloy sheets, shaping them with raw strength. Sparks flared as he bent metal to his will. Within minutes, the plates glowed with internal charge, slowly fusing into a seamless curved chest plate. Heat shimmered along its edges. The crowd hissed in approval. The second cadet was smaller, silken, with pheromone sacs layered into her exposed collarbone. She gathered biofibers from a nearby sample rack, hands moving fast. She wove the strands into a breathing carapace that shimmered with deep reds and soft purples. When she triggered the pheromone burst, the fibers snapped taut, forming a flexible armor that flexed like muscle under skin. Applause followed. The beauty of living armor was hard to ignore. A third stepped forward and produced mineral seeds from a pouch. He pressed one to his chest. With a crackling hiss, it activated, and jagged crystals erupted outward in a spiral. Within seconds, a sharp-edged shield enveloped his torso, pulsing faintly with inner light like a breathing geode. More admiration. Heads bobbed, chests rumbled with impressed clicks. Each piece gleamed, ceremonial, proud. Armor as tribute, armor as proof of belonging. The instructor nodded once, then turned his gaze to the human. You. Step forward. All movement in the hall stopped. The human, Cadet Matt Dawson, stepped out of the line. He didn't have claws, no gland sacs, no alloy bones. His uniform looked like standard Earth issue. Navy sleeves rolled to the elbow, boots worn down by weeks of gravel running. His expression was unreadable. He walked to the center of the hall, scanned the room once, just a slow pass across the materials, and made no move toward the crystal pile or the biofiber vat. Instead, he turned, walked to the far corner, and picked up a stack of thick training manuals from a forgotten shelf, the kind used in first-year lectures. Dusty, heavy, neglected. He tucked the books under one arm and grabbed a roll of duct tape from the supply bin near the maintenance tools. A few cadets turned to each other in confusion. He set the books on the floor, crouched, and selected 4-2 as thick as his forearm, worn at the spine. One was titled Combat Scenarios. Volume 2. Another, Interplanetary Defense Tactics. He pressed them against his chest, 2 over the sternum, 2 lower across the ribs. Then he tore a strip of duct tape. The sound echoed. He wrapped the books tight, arms working slowly. Tape hissed as it peeled, crinkled as it bound. Around once, twice, 3 times, until the stack held fast against his torso. No elegance. No glow. Just layers of binding, gray and uneven. He stood, tested the fit with a slight twist of his shoulders, then adjusted the top book so the spine sat directly over his heart. A few cadets burst into laughter. "That's his armor?" a Jarathi snorted. "Cargo tape and paper?" A squeaking hoarse chortle from the other side. Is he planning to read his attacker to death? The instructor raised a hand, and the room silenced instantly. Dawson exhaled once, steady. The instructor turned, walked to the edge of the room, and picked up a training rifle. It was standard issue for live trials, low-powered but calibrated for armor testing. Not lethal, but absolutely strong enough to bruise ribs or leave burns through weak plating. He checked the charge. Full. He faced Dawson, raised the weapon. "Ready?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Dawson answered. The instructor fired. The bolt cracked out with a sound like dry lightning. It tore through the space between them in half a second, glowing hot. The impact hit square in the center of Dawson's chest. Foomp. The top book's cover exploded outward, scattering ash and curled paper. Smoke rose as the pages blackened, but nothing else moved. Dawson didn't stagger, he didn't drop. He took one short step back, steadied his stance, and looked down at the smoking book. The top volume had been almost entirely incinerated, blackened beyond repair. The second had absorbed most of the force. The edges were singed, the center page seared, but the bolt had stopped there. Matt Dawson stood upright. No burn marks on his uniform, no signs of injury, just smoke drifting from a charred paperback strapped to his chest with duct tape. The hall was dead silent. He looked at the instructor, then reached up and tapped the books with 2 fingers. "Knowledge protects," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "Sometimes, this is all you've got." Silence held for another full second, then the instructor lowered the rifle. Several cadets flinched, a few unconsciously stepped backward. Not from the bolt, from the man who had taken it without flinching, wearing the most absurd armor they'd ever seen. A Rixari cadet murmured, "That wasn't possible." Another, from the crystalline field, whispered, "It stopped the bolt. Paper stopped the bolt." The instructor holstered the rifle, his expression unreadable. "Cadet Dawson," he said, "stand down." Matt unwrapped the duct tape slowly. The books peeled off in layers, the top one crumbling in his hands. He set the scorched remains gently on the edge of the materials table. Then he returned to formation, still silent, smoke lingering faintly on his shirt. The rest of the session passed without comment. No one else stepped forward. There was nothing left to prove. That night, the halls buzzed with whispered debate. It must have been the angle. He's denser than he looks. Human bone density is irregular. Was it the tape? Did the adhesive diffuse the impact? Someone even said, maybe it wasn't a real shot. Maybe it was staged. But the instructor had used full charge. Everyone had seen the calibration. Others said nothing at all. They just stared at the charred book on the table left untouched since the shot. Pages fused together by fire, still faintly warm. One cadet, emboldened by curiosity, tried strapping 2 textbooks to his own chest that evening and asked a friend to fire the same rifle. The bolt went straight through, shredded the pages, bruised his ribs, 1 hairline fracture. He reported to the med bay an hour later. Diagnosed and treated simple fracture of the 8th rib, no displacement, wrapped and cleared in 12 hours. He avoided Dawson after that. Everyone else just whispered. If it wasn't the books, then what was it? By morning, the books were gone. Not cleared by staff, not filed or scanned. Just gone. Someone had moved them in the night. The scorched one, the one that had stopped the bolt dead, disappeared. No announcement. No record in the logs. Even the char pattern on the floor beneath it had been scrubbed away. Whispers spread faster than announcements ever could. In the west corridor, a Jorathi cadet was overheard muttering, "He used something else. Had to." At the mess hall, someone quietly floated a theory. The books were laced with carbon mesh. Down in the engineering wing, 2 Kelvosh students tried to simulate the shot with manual equations, and found only one consistent conclusion. It should not have stopped. Not unless the pages contained some form of ballistic gel, which, clearly, they had not. Even then, their model failed to match the actual impact dispersal. The energy pattern didn't line up, it wasn't absorbed, it was redirected. That part confused the engineers the most. Paper didn't redirect anything. The instructor remained silent. Cadet Matt Dawson went about his day with methodical quiet. No strutting, no explanation. When pressed, he offered nothing more than the words he'd already said. Knowledge protects. Sometimes this is all you've got. He repeated it only once when a Rixari cadet followed him to the stairwell and asked if it was a joke. That cadet later told his friends Dawson had looked him in the eye without blinking and said, "It worked, didn't it?" That afternoon, training resumed in the endurance chambers. The cadets were rotated through a gravity pressure gauntlet designed to simulate high-impact movement in armor. Most struggled through. One of the crystalline armored cadets fractured a facet in his left shoulder when it vibrated under torque. Dawson ran the gauntlet in standard uniform, no armor, not even a vest. He passed without incident. The Kelvosh instructor supervising the session logged his performance with a notation. Minimal deviation under kinetic pressure. No joint lag. posture upright, spine loaded but not overcompensating, functional control under stress. No one talked to him afterward. Later that evening, another cadet tried replicating the book armor. Avushin this time, slender, four-limbed, typically agile. She pulled two slim guides from the materials locker, one on atmospheric chemical dispersal, another on long-range targeting. She wrapped them tight with a transparent bonding polymer. It wasn't duct tape, but it had more tensile strength. She asked a friend to fire a test shot. It tore clean through the center, left a ragged scorch across her left clavicle, and embedded itself in the far wall. She yelped in pain and dropped, clutching the wound. Med staff were called. She left with second-degree burns across her upper chest and minor muscular blistering, prescribed 2 days of rest and a dermal regeneration patch. The instructor reprimanded both her and the shooter, but only lightly. Everyone knew what had motivated it. They didn't understand, Dawson said quietly when he heard. Cameron, the other human cadet, raised an eyebrow. Understand what? That it wasn't the material, it was how it was used. Cameron didn't respond right away. He leaned back on his bunk and tossed a foam core ball toward the ceiling. You were serious back there, weren't you? He asked. That wasn't for show, is? Dawson nodded. Back home, I saw worse done with less. Books and tape. Books, tape, whatever's within reach, you make it work. If you can't, you don't walk away. Dawson nodded again. Exactly. The next day, the instructor pulled Dawson aside between modules. They walked together across the upper deck of the eastern wing, quiet, shielded from the usual foot traffic. The windows overlooked the outer training fields, where cadets jogged laps in their environmental suits. The sun hung low, artificial and yellow, casting sharp shadows across the composite flooring. I reviewed the footage again, the instructor said without preamble. Dawson waited. You were hit square, not a glancing shot. The bolt impacted center mass. Yes, sir. It's a sting. And you were not injured. No, sir. That is not possible with printed paper and adhesive. Dawson didn't respond. The instructor stopped walking and turned to face him. Explain it. Dawson looked at the ground, then up again. His voice was steady but low. I knew it would work. I knew the thickness, the density, the type of paper. These manuals are printed with tri-weave pulp, denser than standard cellulose. The duct tape held it tight, kept the paper from shifting under impact. The bolt hit the surface, started to burn, but it diffused before it could tunnel through. That's all. That is not all. No, Dawson admitted. It's not. The instructor narrowed his eyes. Then, what else? There was a long pause. Not defiant, not evasive, just heavy with thought. Back home, Dawson said finally. I knew a guy, scrawny, soft-spoken. Couldn't afford armor. He worked at a scrapyard during the day, studied engineering at night. His neighborhood was rough. Gunfire wasn't rare. One night, he gets caught in the open. Nothing but a backpack and a textbook inside. He raises it, the shot hits, burns through the cover, stops in the second chapter. What was the textbook? Electrical Systems Maintenance. The instructor's brow furrowed. Everyone called it luck, Dawson continued. But he didn't. He said he packed the heaviest book he had. Said if he couldn't afford body armor, he'd settle for brain armor. Brain armor, the instructor repeated. Dawson nodded once. You get creative when you can't afford failure. The instructor said nothing, then slowly turned and walked back toward the main wing. Dawson returned to training. That night, the simulation logs from the shot were reanalyzed by the security systems. The data came back strange. The bolt's energy profile showed a mid-flight distortion, less than 1 meter before impact minor, but measurable, as if something in the surrounding air had shifted the bolt's trajectory just enough to slow it. Not deflect, just stretch it. The analysts flagged it, filed a secondary report, and sent a copy to the engineering division for review. The note attached read, Impact dispersion suggests localized microfriction field, no source located. Paper does not behave this way. They reopened the footage again. Still, the same result. The bolt hit. The book burned. The cadet stood. Later that night, surveillance caught Dawson in his dorm. He sat on his bunk, one knee up, a half-burnt manual resting across his thigh. Not the cover, the second book, the one that stopped the rest of the shot. He was reading it. The hole in the middle had burned straight through the section on energy weapons calibration. He paused there, then turned the page carefully, tracing the edge where the shot had eaten the ink. Then he reached for a pen, flipped to the inside cover, and wrote a single line. Held under fire, still useful. He closed the book, turned off the light, and went to sleep. By the third day, the instructor could no longer contain the implications. What was meant to be a ceremonial exercise in ingenuity had turned into something else entirely, a problem, a rumor, a myth, depending on who was asked. And now it had become a logistical anomaly. Because the books Dawson used, they were standard issue. Nothing special, no shielding, no alloys, no classified binding. The Academy had thousands in circulation. Yet after 2 replications failed, with one ending in a medbay visit and the other narrowly avoiding a cracked sternum, something had to give. The Academy launched a formal materials inquiry. They analyzed the manual's print density, scanned them under spectrometry, and tested tensile stress under controlled impact. They replicated the duct tape's elasticity profile. They even reran the energy bolt calibration. Every test led to the same conclusion. Under controlled conditions, the setup should not have worked. Still, Dawson had stood there, and it had. The review board labeled the test inconclusive, but the label did nothing to quiet the speculation. The Kelvosh instructors called it improvisational brilliance. The Brelac department privately theorized pre-impact kinetic damping based on subtle human movement. The crystalline cadets were less analytical, they just stopped laughing when Dawson entered a room. No one said anything to him directly anymore. They just watched. During the weekly physical evals, Dawson logged standard metrics: no enhancements, no augments, resting heart rate, 61, grip strength, average. Reaction time, within norm for baseline humans. But when they measured his postural tolerance during stress hold drills, something stood out. He didn't lock his knees, didn't clench under pressure. He flexed slightly, just enough to absorb kinetic stress and distribute it through his frame. Not visibly, just enough. A trait noted in the report as instinctual micro-distribution under duress. The analyst flagged it, then moved on, but the note stuck. That evening, Cadet Thraxon first to present. The one with the fused alloy chest plate cornered Dawson outside the friction range. "You are not stronger," Thraxon said. "Not faster. Your armor was not better. So, why did it work?" Dawson met his eyes calmly. "Because I believed it would." Thraxon scoffed. "Belief does not stop energy bolts." "No," Dawson agreed. "But it's what made me choose those books. What made me bind them tight. Stand still. Belief guided every step of that moment." Thraxon bristled. "Then belief is your armor?" "No, knowledge was." "Was not. And belief made it work?" Dawson considered that. "Belief made me stand there long enough for it to work." Thraxon didn't answer. He walked off, jaw tight. The next day, he added an internal reactive membrane to his alloy plate, something to mimic resilience under uncertainty. But it cracked under lateral strain. The engineering crew logged it as a failed augmentation. The whisper chain grew longer. One Gorathi claimed that Earth children were taught to use dictionaries as shields. A Rixari swore she saw a human documentary where ancient warriors used encyclopedia sets as ballistic barriers. A Kelvosh quietly asked the human language tutor if there was any historical basis for knowledge being bulletproof. Dawson said nothing. He trained, he read, he worked through the simulator logs. But in his quarters, he taped one of the damaged manuals back together, not to restore it but to study the damage. He flipped through page after page, analyzing how the energy had scorched, twisted, and curled each layer. The blast pattern told a story not just of impact, but of diffusion. It hadn't tunneled through like a drill. It had flattened, spread like heat through water. He sketched the blast radius across each page, noted the changes in ink density, circled where the bolt stopped, page 187. Diagram of energy beam dispersal cones. He stared at it, a long time. then wrote another note in the margin. Even the diagram took a hit. That same night, a request hit the engineering wing. Requesting test of impulse control dispersion through layered paper and cloth adhesive. Simulate field expedient protection using non-standard materials. Include human-controlled variables in modeling. It came unsigned. But the lead engineer added it to the test queue under a simple label. Dawson variant. The test ran 4 days later. They used the same books, same tape, same rifle. And this time, they asked Dawson to wrap it himself. He did, carefully. Tighter than before, measured spacing, pressed flat to eliminate air gaps. When the rifle fired, the bolt hit center mass again. It burned through 2 pages this time. Stopped in the 3rd. The crowd around the test range didn't cheer, they didn't speak at all. One of the Kelvosh instructors leaned toward a peer and whispered, "He's adjusting in real time." The other nodded. "He doesn't repeat, he refines." Fasta. After the test, Dawson didn't linger. He returned to his dorm, showered, and began reading again. Same manual. Same burn mark, now traced and labeled. Cameron knocked once and entered without waiting. "You're starting to scare people," he said, dropping onto the second bunk. They were scared before. They're scared differently now. Dawson closed the book. "What we did," Cameron continued, "was supposed to be a footnote, a weird human moment. But now there's a test variant named after you. That doesn't happen. I didn't name it." "I know. That's what makes it worse." Silence passed, comfortable but dense. Cameron glanced at the scorched manual. "You know, if someone told me 3 months ago that I'd be watching you use duct tape and required reading to stop a plasma bolt, I'd have laughed." "You did laugh," Dawson said. "Yeah," Cameron admitted. "But then it worked." He looked up. "So, was it just you?" Dawson blinked. "What do you mean? I mean, could any human have done it, or was it you? Specifically you?" Dawson didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I don't know. I just know I didn't doubt it, not for a second." And Cameron nodded. "Yeah, that's probably why it worked." At the next Interspecies Strategy Forum, a Brelac commander cited Dawson by name during a lecture on battlefield innovation. She showed a still image of the scorched book with the tape around it. Then she said, "Humans don't build armor the way we do. They build meaning into objects that shouldn't have it. Then they wear that meaning like a shield." No one questioned her. No one laughed. The cadets just stared at the image, wondering how much more could be hidden inside pages meant only to be read. The next morning began with silence. Not the usual kind, drowsy, pre-routine quiet, but the kind that meant someone important had died, or something important had been discovered. Neither was technically true. But every corridor, every hall, even the mess carried that low, weighted stillness. Everyone moved slower. Voices dropped. Conversations started, but rarely ended. By then, the legend had grown larger than the moment. And Cadet Matt Dawson had started keeping to himself. The manual he'd read, still blackened, still torn, was now tucked beneath his bunk with the corners laminated. Not to preserve the book, but the whole. The whole mattered. So did the page numbers, so did the weight. In the center of the manual, a note had been scrawled by hand. "This stopped a bolt. Ask why, not how." That same afternoon, the Academy Board convened to review the simulation files a final time. The results were the same. The bolt should have pierced, the tape should have shifted. The paper should have ignited in a chain reaction. It hadn't rating. One of the behavioral analysts offered a new hypothesis. "Human objects carry contextual load," she said. "They don't just use tools, they imbue them, assign meaning." When Dawson wrapped books around his chest, he wasn't building armor. He was reinforcing a belief, that knowledge his own, and what the book symbolized was enough to hold. "Belief alters energy?" another instructor scoffed. "In humans," the analyst replied, "sometimes, yes." They didn't pursue the theory, but no one dismissed it either. The file was closed, marked as resolved, irregular outcome. Privately, the label meant they had no idea what really happened. That evening, Cadet Ryle Vass, a tall, soft-spoken Echeron who had earlier woven her shimmering biofiber armor with pride, approached Dawson while he stood alone at the observation platform, overlooking the nighttime training fields. She didn't say anything at first, just stood beside him, her multicolored armor shifting gently in the windless air, alive and listening. After a long pause, she finally said, "Your armor looked like nothing." "I know. But it worked." "I know." She turned her head, one eye lens focusing on him. "Is that what being human is like? Making things from pieces no one else values?" Dawson's jaw tightened slightly. "Sometimes it's all we've got. Sometimes it's all we need." She looked back at the field, where two first-year cadets were struggling to fix a collapsed drone. They were arguing over wiring sequences. Reel said, "I don't think I've ever feared something that wasn't sharp, glowing, or venomous, until now." Dawson looked at her. "You're not afraid of me." "No," she agreed. "I'm afraid of what else you might turn into armor." Later that night, in the quiet of the dormitory wing, security footage caught Dawson doing something that wouldn't be noticed until the next cycle's review. He was alone, sitting on the floor, books open in front of him. He wasn't reading them, he was stacking them, one on top of another, spine-aligned, careful. He built a column 4 manuals high, wrapped it in duct tape again, 2 passes only, enough to hold without warping the edges. Then he set it down and retrieved a dummy blade from the training kit under his bed. He tested the weight, adjusted his stance, and then slowly, deliberately swung the blade down toward the center of the stack. The impact was solid, blunt, the duct tape didn't tear. The top book shuddered, pages shifted, but the column held. He examined the strike zone, no splits, no gaps. He knelt, peeled back a few pages, no tears below the first few layers. He sat back and sighed. Not out of relief. Out of confirmation. The following morning, the instructor stood before the entire class in the trial hall. Armor Day had passed, but the walls still bore the scars of it. Without ceremony, he activated a projection behind him, a photo of Dawson's armor during the impact trial. Then, another slide, the charred manual's cross-section. Then another, the note Dawson had written. This stopped a bolt. Ask why, not how. He turned to face the room. There are over 50 cultures represented in this academy. We've seen armor woven from spider steel, armor grown from memory-reactive crystals, armor that hums with blood-matched frequency. He gestured toward the projection of the books. And then there's this. Books, tape, intention. Not built with pride, not displayed with ritual, just made to work. No one moved. No system teaches it, no tradition refines it. But every so often, a species finds survival not in perfection, but in adaptation. He locked eyes with Dawson. Cadet Dawson reminded us that armor isn't always worn. Sometimes it's made, out of need, out of belief, out of whatever you have left. Silence. And then, unexpectedly, the room didn't break into applause. It just stayed quiet. Like everyone needed a moment to feel a little smaller, a little more aware of what they'd just learned. That night, the instructor sat alone in his office, finalizing reports. The footage from Dawson's dorm had come through. He watched it twice, stopped it at the moment Dawson sliced the blade into the duct tape stack. He rewound, watched again, still no break. He added a note to Dawson's file. Human cadet demonstrates consistent success with improvised kinetic dampening constructs using non-military materials. Unclear if performance is replicable or unique to psychological imprinting. Then, after a long pause, he added another. Recommend observation. Do not test recklessly. There is a pattern here. It is not material. It is mindset. Across campus, Dawson stood in his dorm doorway, holding the charred manual. He slid it into a padded envelope, wrote a short message on the label, and handed it to the station clerk. Send it Earthside. Address is on file. What's in it? The clerk asked, curious. Something I don't need to carry anymore. He walked away without looking back. Inside the package, the note read, Took a hit for me. Thought you'd want it back. You were right, Jason. Knowledge does protect. The return address was to a scrapyard,